Welcome to the first episode of the Spirit, Mind and Soul podcast. Today I'm talking to Jill McClennen, who is an End of Life Doula. She'll be talking about a horrific incident in her early adulthood which led her on to the path of helping others. I would be so grateful if you could like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi Jill, lovely to have you on the podcast today. I'm really looking forward for you to share your story with the listeners. It's a really powerful one. So,
well, thank you.
I think really what I would like to hear is, I know there was a really significant point in your life when you were around 20. Can you tell me a bit about life before that, leading up to that point?
Yeah, totally. So I was raised in I can't even say it, I apologize, southern New Jersey. Most people know of the state of New Jersey and they think of, cities and factories and all that. I was raised in the farmland of New Jersey. It's a very different place. And I was raised by a single mother. I didn't really have much of a relationship with my father growing up. And that definitely led to me making decisions throughout my teenage years that maybe were not the wisest decisions. So by the time that I even hit 20 years old, I had really kind of already had some experiences in the world that led me to really not feeling great. I just knew that there had to be more to life. I heard about yoga for the first time when I was 12, and I remember seeing it in a picture, and it was a really old picture from the 70s of like a guy meditating and talking about yoga, and I was like, that's the thing that I'm looking for. So I kind of had started, even at a younger age, looking for something to fill what was really just a hole in my life. As an adult, especially now looking back, I'm like, well, yeah, that hole was because your father was not there. But at that time, I didn't realize that. And so turning to drugs and drinking and, sex and all the things that teenagers tend to get into to fill this hole really just was essentially causing me more pain and suffering than anything else. But at the time, I didn't know what else to do. So that's where I kind of, decided when I graduated high school. I was like, I am going to go away to college. I'm going to go as far away as I can possibly get, which was not that far at the time. I just went to upstate New York. And I just was running from what I felt like was the cause of my problems, which was South Jersey. And even though at the time my grandmother, she was in her probably 70s, and she kept saying to me, Jill, people aren't any different. Things aren't any different. It doesn't matter where you go. It's not going to be different. And you could hear that, but not understand it. So, and she was right in the long run. But I did end up going away to college, and I was, do you want me to tell my story now? Like get right into that?
Yeah, so you were at college. I know that you were working at the time. Was this upstate New York that had this particular job? Yeah?
Yes. Yeah. So I went to culinary school. I went to probably one of the best culinary schools in the world, the Culinary Institute of America. And the story that I'm about to tell is in no reflection of the CIA. It was a job that I had off campus. But within my first week of school there was somebody that was like going around to all the new students and saying, hey, I work for this winery off campus, down the river a little ways. And we always need, servers, we need people to work. And again, having a single mother, I knew that she was paying for me to go to school. So I had to have jobs. I had multiple jobs. I actually ended up working at 1.3 different jobs. And so I jumped on it. I was like, perfect. I'm great at serving. I could do this. And my boss knew that I needed as much money as possible. I was always asking for extra hours. I was like, anything that you need, like I'll do it. At one point I was even like doing gardening at his house, at the winery, like anything that I could do that would give me extra money. And so he approached me one day and he offered me $3,000 to essentially sleep with him once a month. And it was a lot of money. And I actually briefly did think about it. And I was like, you know what? I can't do this. Like, I don't care how much money it is. I can't do it. It's not for me. I very politely turned him down. And then he one day was like, oh, you have to meet me over here for your paycheck because, he knew I needed my paycheck. And when I got there, he kind of was like, talking to me, and he was like, oh, and here, have this drink. Looking back on it, really not a wise decision. But again, at the time I was 21. I did not think that anybody would do anything like that. And he put something in my drink. In some ways, I really struggled over the years because I almost felt guilty because I don't remember most of it, where I know that there's women that go through really terrible experiences and they remember. And so I had to struggle with some of that as well. But when I woke up, he threw money at me. He threw $500 at me and told me to get up and leave. And driving home, I remember being like, what just happened? Like, what was this? And so I took the money and I opened a savings account that then eventually I used that money to move myself to California. So in the long run, I didn't want to use the money, but I also was like, well, what else am I going to do with it? So I used it for something good. But the depression and the guilt and the shame that came after it was something that I struggled with, especially at the beginning. Within the first year, I didn't tell anybody what happened for quite a few months until I ran into one of my friends growing up when I was home. And she was like, what's going on? Like, you don't even look the same. Like, what's happening? And I was like, I'm fine. And she was like, you're not fine. Like, something is wrong. And so when I told her about it, again, being from Jersey, she was like, we're going to go burn his house down. We are going to go burn that man's house down. And I was like, no, we're not going to do that. But it was, the only person I told for many years. But I held it all inside. And within about a year, I ended up almost getting expelled from the same culinary school because I was away in Florida for my internship. We had to go and get work experiences. And I was working at a hotel, and there was some people there that were just kind of bullies. They were not nice people. It really was that they were not nice people. And I even went to my bosses and I was like, look, this is not going to end well. Like, they keep pushing me. They keep, saying things. They locked me in a walk-in one day. Like, this is not going to end well. Like, I feel it inside of me. Yeah. And I got into a fight at a bar. And I ended up losing my internship 15 weeks into an 18-week internship. The only reason that the college did not expel me is because I had gone to my boss literally that morning. But then I fell into a really deep depression. And I ended up finding yoga and meditation. And it was one of those things where sometimes they say, the universe puts things in, your face so that you can find them. I had gone to get my car serviced, and at the time this was pre smartphones, right? So at the car dealership they had computers set up and you could get on the computers and do stuff. And I sat down at a computer and there was a website up for this yoga studio, and I was like, oh, that's that place down the street from me. I've driven by it before. And then the next day I went into a store and there was a flyer for this yoga studio with one of those little things where you rip off the phone number. So I ripped off the phone number, I took it home, threw it on a desk, and I had, a day off. I could barely get out of bed because I was so depressed. And I finally was like, Jill, you're going to get out of bed and you're going to at least clean your bedroom. You have to do something. And so I was cleaning the room and I found the phone number and I thought, I'm going to call. And so I call this place and the owner answers the phone and he says, oh, we have meditation on Sunday evenings. It starts in about an hour. Why don't you come down and meditate? And I was like, I've never done it. He was like, oh, it's no problem. You'll be fine. And so I get there, I sit down, and it's just him and his wife. It's an hour-long meditation. Like now looking back on it, I'm like, was I crazy? But I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So it was an hour-long meditation with like chanting in, Hindi afterwards. I was so confused. And he said to me, I want you to come to my yoga class tomorrow morning. And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, just come to my class. And so I came to his first class, or my first class, and he said to me after the class, he was like, have you ever done yoga before? And I was like, a little bit. I, did a little, once or twice. And he said, well, I want you to take my yoga teacher training. And I was like, hold on. What are you even saying to me? And, that started this path where by the time that I graduated, so I would have never been able to take the yoga teacher training if I wouldn't have gotten fired from that job, because I would have already gone back to college. And so my graduation was the same week, and the timing just lined up. It was the same week that my new internship ended. And so like at the graduation, and I remember Barata saying to me once, Jill, at that point I had told him how much I'd moved. I had moved like 8 times in 2 years or something insane. And he was like, do you know that what you're running from, you can't escape because it's inside of you? And I was like, that's kind of the same thing my grandma told me. And I was like, but I guess you're kind of right. And at graduation, I cried. I was like, you saved my life. And it was the truth. That moment saved my life. Finding that little ticket with that phone number on it. Because, again, even before that incident happened, I was just not making wise decisions all the time. And it was just trying to fill something in me. And so, like, that moment, I think, was like the tipping point for me to be like, either you continue down this path and you're gonna end up killing yourself, or you can go down this path. And that's the path that I've been on now for the last, because now I'm 44, so the last 23 years I've been on this journey to really, not just within myself, but really help the people around me understand that where we come from does not always mean that that's the path that we have to take. Our traumas do not define us. You can heal from them. And even for me, a couple years ago, this was, maybe 3 years ago, I was talking to my therapist and I said, I don't understand. Around this time of year, every year I get into a fight with somebody, like fighting with people on the street, like fighting with people online, fighting with my friends. Like, I don't understand. And I don't like it. I don't like this fighting and yelling and all this stuff. And so she says, oh, well, what else happened this weekend? Because it was Memorial Day weekend in the United States is like around May. And so we start like talking and we're going through the things. And I said, oh, and that's the weekend that my boss drugged me and raped me. And she was like, well, hello, you couldn't fight then. And so now when it comes to be about that time every year, your body just gets into this state of like wanting to fight because you couldn't fight then. And I was like, oh, damn, Colby. Okay. You are so right. And so that next year leading up to that weekend, I designed this whole like shamanic ritual, like journeying and a cacao ritual and just like a whole thing where I was like, I'm done with this. I'm done. I'm going to just face it and I'm going to heal it. And that was 2 years ago. And so, now I'm not even worried about this, upcoming anniversary essentially, because last one, it went by and I didn't even feel it at all. It really completely shifted inside of me. So yeah, so that's been kind of my journey.
And then obviously, so what you do now, are you still doing your yoga, Jill? You still
I do. So
yeah.
I teach off and on, but I still practice yoga. I actually took my vows to become Buddhist last year. So my meditation practice is even stronger than it's ever been. And probably in 2020, when like, the world was shut down and everybody was like doing stuff online, I started really looking more into taking some movement classes that were a little bit more feminine, because I've always been very like masculine energy. I've worked in kitchens all of my career, very masculine energy throughout my entire life. Again, like fighting, I used to fight when I was a kid, and I was fighting all the way up through my 40s. And so I wanted to bring more feminine in. And I started taking classes on learning how to move my body in a way, because even for me, yoga is still very masculine. It's very, you do the poses, you do them in this order, everything has to be perfectly in alignment. And I wanted to bring some different, softer movements in. And so now what I do in the morning, I still would call it yoga, kind of. Now I really just say in my morning, routine, I do movement and meditation, because I've brought a lot more flowing movements into my practice, even though a lot of it is still very yoga based. But yeah, I couldn't focus and function throughout the day if I didn't have those two practices. I know that it makes a huge difference for me, because I have gone through periods that maybe I didn't do it as regularly just because life. And I really feel that I need it. I know that I need it if I want to be at my best and feel my best.
But what you do for work now is really different, obviously, from everything we've just discussed. You want to tell us a bit about? I didn't know, I had never heard of an end of life doula before, so you introduced me. I was following you, just kind of watching what you were doing before you agreed to come on the podcast. So I'd love to hear more about what that involves and how that helps the families.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. I ended up moving back home and taking care of my grandmother at the end of her life, the same grandmother that I was very close to when I was a child. And so when she was turning 90, I wanted to be home and be near her and be able to spend the last couple years of her life together. And so I took care of her for the last 4 years of her life, progressively needing more and more care up until the last probably month of her life, which was when it was more of like what I would now call the active dying phase for somebody. And I was not prepared. I had no idea what I was doing. I thought, you see it in the movies. Somebody comes home, they sleep a lot, it's very calm, it's very peaceful. And that wasn't the experience. It still was a beautiful experience. I would not have ever traded that experience. I loved my grandmother so much that it was such a time for us to be together in a really intimate, personal way. But I was not prepared for the fact that, a lot of times people get very agitated at the end of life. And so my grandmother, there was times she didn't even know who I was. And I was so confused. And hospice in the United States is really an amazing service that a lot of people use, but they're only around for a couple hours during the day. Most of it was me and her. And at that point, I had a 6-month-old baby. So it was me, her, and my 6-month-old baby. And I did not know what I was doing. I really could have used somebody to explain to me what was happening and to just help me through the experience and even sit with my grandmother and I. Now looking back on it, she didn't end up dying at home. We ended up having her go out somewhere. Now, I would have really preferred to have set up her space the way that she wanted it and have been home with her and just sat with her for the entire last 24 hours of her life. But I didn't know, and I didn't have anybody to help me. And so when hospice came in and they were like, we probably should send her somewhere, I was like, all right, sure, whatever you think. And so that started me down this path of really wanting to help people and their families when it comes to the end of life. The realistic, what to expect. You can call me in the middle of the night if you're up and your grandma doesn't know who you are and you're really confused. Like, I'm there for you. And so I became a death doula or end of life doula, depending, it's all the same stuff. In 2020, I actually started pre-COVID to do my training. And then when everything shut down, it actually worked out really well because then I was able to like fast track what I thought was going to take me many years. And now that's the work that I do full time. I volunteer as well at a local hospital. So I go into the hospital and I sit with clients from diagnosis of a terminal illness all the way through until the end, sitting with the families. And it's really an honor for me. I feel really privileged essentially to be with people at that time in their life. And for somebody like me, especially because of some of my sexual trauma in the past, I really didn't allow people to get very close to me. I'm very uncomfortable if people touch me. I don't want to be hugged. Like I really prefer distance between me and other humans. And I realized one day when I was sitting with a client, and it was an older man that had some developmental delays. So essentially his entire life he had been living in a group home. And I was sitting with him and I was holding his hand and I was rubbing his arm and I was talking to him. And when he started to get a little agitated and he was breathing heavy, I just like gently rested my hand on his chest and like I tried to calm his breathing. And I thought, what a interesting experience this is, because this is very intimate. I'm very close to this person. I'm touching them in a very loving, gentle, intimate way. And potentially he's never had a woman touch him in that way. And I certainly, in my, what I would say, my normal life, ever allow myself to be that close to most people. But yet in this space that we're existing in together, it was beautiful and it made me really grateful for the experience because I found it was healing even for me to go through that and realize that like I can be close to people and it could feel comfortable for me, but also to be able to give him that gift at the end of his life, to have somebody willing to sit and touch him and talk to him and just allow him to feel not alone. I think it's beautiful work and I love doing it. I love telling people about it because we're going to need more and more of this type of work. But most people don't know that we exist, death doulas.
Yeah. I didn't. I'd heard of a birth doula, which I think is great as well. But yeah, like I say, I'd been following your work and I knew you spoke about death a lot, but I didn't quite know what the work that you did around that. But I think I said to you when we spoke before, I think the way that you talk about death is very beautiful as well. And I encourage people to go and follow you on Facebook and the page that you have there. I think you ask very, your questioning around death, I think gets people thinking. It certainly got me thinking. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So on Facebook, I have a Facebook group called End of Life Clarity Circle, which I'm sure you can put a link somewhere if people are interested.
I will, yeah.
And I started the group because I wanted to have a space. There's grief groups on Facebook and there's caregiver groups and there's different groups that had to do with death and dying and all these things. But I wanted it to be a space that was more about our curiosities around end of life and getting people to think differently about what they might believe. And so every day, Monday to Saturday, I post a different question in the Facebook group. And it's usually, sometimes they're deeper questions like, what is your biggest fear around death and dying? Other times it's something a little bit more silly, like if you were to be reincarnated as a plant, what type of plant would you be? But it really allows us to have conversations that get people thinking about what they believe and why they believe it. Because so often we believe things about ourselves and the world around us based off of what we were taught as children, from our religion, from our parents, from our community. Again, I grew up in South Jersey. It is a very distinct culture in South Jersey versus anywhere else in the world. And that doesn't mean that we believe these things because that's what's real within us. That's what's true within us. And sometimes it just takes somebody to ask you a question and to go, oh, I don't know. Why do I believe that when we die, we go to heaven? Well, I don't know, because that's what my parents taught me. Well, what do you think heaven looks like? Oh, well, I don't know. What does heaven look like? And we've had some really amazing conversations, and I enjoy having that space and holding that space for a really large community now of people that I know. There's a lot of people that read things, but they never comment. I'll run into people in real life out in public that I don't even realize are part of my Facebook group. And they'll say, oh, I love your group. And I'm like, really? Okay, awesome. I'm glad you love it so much. So that was really my main reason for starting it. And then, on my Facebook, like my actual profile, I do try to talk about death and dying and grief in a way that just doesn't sugarcoat it. So many people have never even said the word death. They'll use other words for it. They passed away, or I'm sorry you lost them, or like things along those lines. And so hearing somebody talk about it in a way that's not morbid, it's not scary, it's just part of life. I mean, death is part of life. And so I want to have people feel comfortable. And that's even why I started my own podcast, because I was like, you know what? If people can hear these conversations, it's really going to help everybody get more comfortable. The biggest thing that we could do for ourselves and for our loved ones is to talk about what we want at the end of life, to talk to our spouses and our parents and our children and even our friends. And we don't do it. And we don't do it because it's uncomfortable, because we've never done it before. They don't talk to us, we don't talk to them. And so the more that I have conversations with people and the more that people get comfortable hearing it, hopefully that'll encourage conversations amongst our loved ones. Because I feel like it's a gift that you can give to your loved ones to have this conversation. Because at some point, we're all going to die.
Do you feel that by doing the role that you do, has it had, how has it made you feel? I know that I don't feel that you're someone who fears death at all, but have there been any profound experiences that have really stuck with you or changed your views or worried you in any way? Is there anything like that that stands out?
That's a great question. It was something that I did not expect to happen. Again, I've been on a path of trying to, I don't want to say be happy in life, because that's not really the right wording, but I've been on a path since I was a child, essentially, to just be okay with life, to be okay with the ups and the downs, and overall feel joy and feel like I could be present with what was going on. And all these little things that I'd done over the years definitely helped a lot. When I started really learning about death and dying, I've never been afraid of death. When I was a child, I definitely had some morbid curiosities. I would bury animals and then dig them up to see what their bones looked like. And, I was always fascinated with horror stories and ghosts and all that. So I've certainly never been somebody that was afraid of death and dying. And even up until the point where I had children, I wasn't even afraid of dying myself. I really just kind of was honestly, if I died today, I would not care. Now that I have children, it's a different story, because I don't want to leave them to live their life with no mother. So that's different. But the death part itself never scared me. So when I started learning about it, I didn't expect it to transform me in any way. I just thought, okay, I'm going to learn this so I could help other people. And the more that I learned about death and dying and the parts of it that did scare me, which is my children dying. I mean, people lose children. And see, even there, I'm like, I even have a hard time saying children die every day at every age, whether it's newborn within 1 hour to, maybe you're 80 years old and your child's 60. People still have children that die. And I don't care how old you are and how old your child is. The death of a child is something that within me is like my worst nightmare. And as I started facing some of that and really thinking about it, and also just, my husband and I were in our 40s. One of us could die at any point. We don't know. He's on the road right now traveling for work. He could get into an accident and die. It happens to somebody every single day. Somebody's going to get that phone call today that it's their husband. Why not me? I'm not special. There's nothing that protects me from having this happen to me. And talking about it and thinking about it is not going to make it happen. It's not like I'm going to attract it to me. But avoiding ever thinking about it or ever talking about it also isn't going to protect me from having the experience. But I still had to process the way that I felt about it, and I had to process my emotions around it. And the thing that I found that is the greatest gift that becoming a death doula did for me is that I'm so much more present with my family now than I ever used to be. It's amazing the way that now, even when my children argue, it doesn't bother me like it used to. I can stay much more calm about the situation. When they want to do something and I'm in the middle of something, I used to get really frustrated. I was always working a lot. I was studying, I was always busy. And so, if my kids wanted something, it was like interrupting me from what I was doing. And so I would get a little bit short-tempered, where now I just stop and I'll look at them and I just try to take in the whole experience. I just try to memorize. Sometimes I'll almost even pretend in my head of what if I was dead and I was a ghost right now and I was watching this, but I couldn't be here for real? How much I would just want to reach out and touch my child, even if they're screaming at me, even if they're driving me crazy, even if they're interrupting me. And the way that transformed the way that I interact with my family and my friends, I'm just so much more present. And it's what I'd been searching for, I think, all of these years. I mean, this is what Buddhism talks about all the time, is that the only moment that you have is this moment right now. The past doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. The future doesn't exist. If you can live in this present moment, your suffering in life will be reduced. And learning about death and dying is that key for me. And then I found out too that in Buddhism, there is actually death meditations that they tell you should practice. There's something called even the 4 reminders, where one of the reminders is you're going to die. You don't know when, but you're going to die. So you should think about this fact every single day. But it transformed my life, and I hope to be able to help other people not be so afraid of even just starting to think about it. You talk to hospice nurses. There was even a book written, about the 5 regrets of the dying, and the things that they regret: not living their life, essentially living a life that was somebody else's, what their parents wanted them to do, or what they thought they needed to do to make money so that they could dress a certain way, working too much, not spending time with their friends and their family. These are all things that when people are dying, they're like, oh man, I wasted so much of my life on things that weren't important. And I don't want to look back when I'm on my deathbed and think, man, I didn't take that time to play Uno with my kids because I was too busy writing a social media post. And it's not there's still some days when I'm look, I really got to get this done, y'all. I have to get this post done. But I try to really be conscious of the fact that when I'm looking back at my life, the times when I played Uno with my kids at night are what's going to be important to me. even if my business takes off and I make millions of dollars at it. That's not going to be the things that are important. The things that are important are the times that I have now with my children and with my husband, and really being present when I'm there, not thinking about stuff from the past. Because I used to do that a lot too, especially with some of my trauma. I'd replay it over and over, and I just get so stuck in this pain and this like guilt and shame. And, I've let a lot of that go. And it is because one day I'm going to die. And you know what? None of this is going to matter anyway.
So what does the future hold for you then? The way you're talking is you want to expand the work that you're doing then. How do you do that?
One of the things that I really want to do is I sometimes will say to people, I'm a death doula, but I'm an end of life coach. So like people get life coaches all the time, but they don't get somebody that can help them prepare themselves for the fact that they're going to die, their loved ones are going to die. And I really want to be able to help people have essentially the same transformation that I had without needing to become a death doula. You don't have to do this as a career path to still prepare yourself for what will come at you at some point. You're going to have to face it at some point. But also this transformation that I went through that I wasn't expecting, but that I'm so grateful for. That's something that all of us can do. And I can help guide people through this as an end of life coach. And that's definitely work that I'm really wanting to do more of. Not just doing what I would say, like my actual doula work, which is sitting with people at the end of life. I really want to be able to expand it to just help people go through the transformation.
Yeah. And what is something outside of work, just something for you that you're longing for? Is there anything?
Something that I am longing for. I think for me, I still have some of the, what people would call limiting beliefs around money and time, where I don't always take the time that I should to travel and to do things, because in my head I'm like, but I don't have enough money for it. And I get stuck in that loop of like, my daughter wants to go to Paris, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if we could do that. And then I'm like, in the long run, why not? Why can't I do it? So I'm longing for that kind of time freedom that I know exists for people, but that I just can't quite get there yet. But I'm working on it. I'll get there.
Yeah. 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 I like the added word yet at the end because you will get there. And again, going back to personal experiences, is there any moments, empowering moments or inspiring moments that you'd like to share with the listeners that might help them? Just anything significant that you feel helped you on your own journey? Or a magic moment, you might like to call it?
So a magic moment for me, and this one is like kind of a little strange, but in some ways it was one of the defining moments for me, that when I was in high school, I realized that I needed help. And so I started seeing a therapist. And I remember at one point being outside in the spring and looking at a daffodil and being able to see it in a way that I was like, how have I never seen how beautiful this is? It changed, again, it was one of those moments that changed my life forever, because I got that little glimpse of what life could feel like and what life could look like once I got through this journey, essentially. And again, you don't ever get to the end, but once I got through a lot of it and did a lot of the healing work that I needed to do, And I think we get those glimpses throughout our lifetime, throughout our days, and we don't always hold on to them in a way. And I don't mean grasp them and hold on to them, but meaning when you feel that little flicker, that little like glimmer of like, oh, this is my truth. This is the truth of the universe and whatever you want to call it. Really notice it and pay attention to it, and just understand that there is the possibility to live more of life seeing how beautiful things actually really are, that there's the help too. I mean, don't be afraid to ask for the help. I have no shame in saying I have seen a therapist many times over my lifetime for periods of time. Right now, we have a family therapist to help us get through having, two preteen children and what the life is going to be like when they become teenagers. There's nothing wrong with having help. But finding those moments, those like little glimmers, they're beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Jill, for agreeing to come on and sharing that story. I think there's so much value in there that the listeners will get from that. And yeah, I will obviously put links so people can come. I really encourage people to come and follow you on Facebook and listen to your podcast as well. And I wish you all the best with the future.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I appreciate that. And it was a pleasure. I enjoyed being on your podcast.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you got some value from Jill's story. And if you'd like to contact her, details on how to do so will be in the description below. The Spirit, Mind and Soul podcast will be on every second Sunday, and I have more empowering and inspiring stories for you, so please tune in.